Welcome in, everybody, to Basketball by Association. My name is the slightly less frustrated Arky Shea than I was 2 minutes ago. That is my good friend Joel C. Cortez. Joel, do you know that there's some hoops to talk about?
There are, and we got through our technical difficulties here. We'll do an abbreviated version of the show again this week, but we got 2 games to talk about in one series and 2 games left. So we're going to get right to naming the episode, just like we did last week. We had Sean Marion. This week it's episode, 110. Episode 110 of Basketball by Association. 110 career playoff games. There's only 2 players in NBA history who have ever done that. One of them is Terry Cummings from the Milwaukee Bucks and a bunch of other teams. But a long time ago, we actually had an episode named after him. So this instead is the other gentleman with 110 games under his belt. This is fellow podcaster JJ Redick's episode.
Oh my God, he has been all over the news.
Yeah, he's arguably having a more successful career as a podcaster than he did as a player, which was, pretty successful, all things considered. Ton of playoff appearances, a boatload of threes through his career, and a good example of a guy who the first 3-4 years really struggled to latch on in the NBA. Big time questions about his long-term fit, and yet kept grinding away, found that niche, improved his game, and turned it into a very long and productive 14-year career.
I'll just say that I believe what I was about to mention is that I think the start of his media career is far exceeding the start of his NBA career, as far as how well it started and the positivity around it. But no, JJ Redick, he was that grinder, man. That guy that you just sort of would kind of in the back of your head remember what team he was on, and then you'd be reinforced of that when he came like off the bench and got like 4 threes in like a 7-minute stretch, and you're like, oh hey, I remember hating that guy at Duke, and I hate him now again. That's cool. Yeah, screw that guy.
At least he stayed consistent for you. Gave you that consistent experience. Let's talk Warriors and Celtics, Arky Shea.
What happened? I don't understand. Like I don't know. Is it over? Is the series over? Because I predicted that the Celtics would be up. I think I predicted everything that could have happened so far in this series.
Yes.
I don't mean like what has actually happened. I mean all the possibilities that were in there. I've sort of been on board with all of them. And I'll tell you what, starting the third quarter, I kind of felt like things were starting to go that way in game 5.
Game 5, yeah.
Right? But let's first get to game 4. Joel, any surprises to you the way game 4 laid out and how we got that series even yet again?
I mean, we were due for a monster Steph Curry game at some point.
We were, weren't we? Like it felt like we had it was just a matter of time. Like he's that kind of superstar that we just hadn't had that yet. I'm right with you. I think we were due, and I didn't know when it was going to happen, but yeah, it happened in Boston.
Especially with, Draymond really struggling in game 4. Kevon Looney has not been able to have the same type of impact in this series, although he did have 6 points and 11 boards and was pretty big for them in game 4. But overall hasn't done as much. I feel, and we'll get to this in a minute, I think Clay and Andrew Wiggins, especially, who we'll talk about, and even Jordan Poole have all kind of settled into a lane, and they've been able to fill that with steady and predictable production. But Curry had to pick up some slack in game 4, and he absolutely did that. It was a classic superstar playoff game. It was really fun to watch. It's reminiscent of plenty of other Steph Curry games, but you think back to LeBron and KD and Derrick Rose, you think to Michael Jordan, obviously, and Kobe, Iverson. All of the greats have a handful of games, maybe 2 handfuls of games in their highlight reel of playoff contests where they really, really had to carry things.
That's the key. Playoff games in the highlight reel.
Yeah, and even though they were going to get help, and there's unsung heroes, and it was a team effort, game 4, the Golden State Warriors defended their tails off. Like, even as struggling as they were offensively, as a unit, they defended their tails off. But it was Steph Curry who carried them on offense, not just in the sheer production and the final box score, but in the timeliness of baskets and the ability to get them back on track when things were stalling or to stem a run from Boston. And it literally and proverbially saved the series, right? Because otherwise they go down 3-1. So you get this big road win. You tie it back up 2-2, and now suddenly you've got home court advantage again. And the Warriors were able to take care of that in Game 5, which we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, Game 4 is pretty far in the rearview mirror at this point, but we're all going to remember the headline from it, and that's going to be the Steph Curry production.
Yeah, but that's also the case. Like when you start looking back at a lot of these games, right? Like you know, especially when it comes to the playoffs, like you sort of remember the top line, action. Like
7 for 14 from downtown, right? Nothing to shake a stick at there.
Right. Especially considering some of the chilliness we had seen from Steph just before, right? So, I think what's fascinating about Game 4 is that it was a little predictable as far as what you thought was going to happen. Like you thought Golden State being the team that was the favorite in this series, and the team that going into this series I thought was the deeper and clearly more experienced of the two teams. Like I didn't think they were going to be outshined by a moment. Like they weren't going to be worried about how they were going to be able to respond in a game like this, that, whether or not you like the cliche of must win, like you really needed that game to not be behind the 8 ball in a major way, despite the fact that, you theoretically still could have had 2 of the final 3 games if you could have gotten to it at home, but you still would have had to go back to Boston. I think what was fascinating about that is that as much as we consider what Golden State is, when I was just mentioning about their depth and their talent and their experience, they didn't do it from from a consistent team offensive standpoint, right? Like it did take a superstar effort from someone who we had coming into the playoffs kind of felt was a little diminished injuries wise. Always talk about mileage wise. Various defenders, including Marcus Smart, had a pretty good beat on him for a lot of this series so far. And for him to be able to come into a game like that, one of those must-win, air quote, type games, and to know that his team has to have it and he has to be the guy, and still does that against a really, really good defensive Boston Celtics team, I was fascinating. I thought it was an amazing performance in Game 4, and, what else should I expect from someone like Steph Curry at this point?
Golden State, is so well known for the beautiful game concept. 5 guys moving, the ball is moving. And that's when they're at their most dangerous, especially when you get that movement out in transition. And it's like 2 whole layers of movement happening. But Boston defensively has done such a great job, more often than not, of taking away a lot of that back movement, of clamping down, creating pressure. And what you see is the Golden State Warriors suddenly having to play a lot more conventionally, having to go one-on-one, having to dig out offensive possessions on the glass, which Andrew Wiggins has been so instrumental for them. But also, even just reducing it down to 2-man actions, you're seeing simple pick and rolls that the Warriors have to work really, really hard just to be able to execute, and guys that are on the backside somehow are still covered, and they're not able to get much movement when they're coming through the lane. They're getting chipped, they're getting clogged. Boston has done an enormously impressive job on the defensive end throughout the series. It's a testament to how good Golden State is and how good Steph Curry was in Game 4 that everything I just said still wasn't enough. That Golden State was able to dig out that game, play it ugly, play it in isolation, play it where everybody in the entire arena knew that Steph Curry was going to get the ball and the play was going to run for him, and he could still get his shot off. There was a couple of different things that began to change heading into Game 5. Game 4, I think we saw the beginning of it. Golden State did not swamp that third quarter like they're most well known for, nor did they get swamped in the fourth quarter by the Celtics, which is what has been happening throughout this series. It's been close in the first half. Golden State comes out with a big punch. Boston comes out with an even bigger punch in the fourth, and unless Golden State had been able to run up a big enough score ahead of time, the Celtics have won the game, or at least gotten back close enough. But that third quarter in Game 4, it was only a 6-point disparity in favor of the Warriors. but then they came out and won the fourth quarter by 9 points. Fast forward that to game 5, and it's the Warriors who lose the third quarter. It's the first time all series that this has happened, and it feels like the first time in maybe the playoffs that that's happened. I don't know if that's true or not, but Boston beats them by 11, and once again, Golden State comes back and wins by 9 in game 5, and you saw the Celtics change their defensive scheme to go, okay, we've done a masterful job of mucking everybody up and taking away motion and whatever. We cannot let Steph Curry beat us. And that's so easier said than done. Obviously, teams forever have tried to take that approach against Steph, and it does not work. This is how good Boston is defensively and how good a Marcus Smart, who's probably only 85% health-wise, and Robert Williams probably about 65% health-wise, watching the way he moves. But Smart has been so good locking with Steph Curry, and Steph had an off game. You can chalk it up to age, coming off a 43-point game. You can chalk it up to a whole bunch of different things, but the Celtics get a ton of credit for the defensive job they did in executing that game plan, which was deny the ball to Curry at all costs. And once again, testament to Golden State. For all that said, it wasn't enough. The Warriors win because this time Clay picked up a little more slack. Andrew Wiggins picked up a lot more slack. Jordan Poole was in his lane. And if you're going to let a guy like Gary Payton score 15 points off the bench, against the Warriors, and you've already got Poole doing his thing to the tune of 14 points, yeah, there's only one other Warrior who scored off that second unit, but 29 points between those two, that's a really tough order. It's a tall order to try to handle. And, going into game 6, if you're the Celtics, you're looking at this going, okay, we took Steph Curry out of the game and these other guys stepped up. If we try to take the other guys out from stepping up, we've shown we can do that, but then we risk another 40-point Steph game.
I mean, it's fair, right? Like just to sort of worry about that. Like it was sort of interesting to watch from game 4 to game 5 how things sort of are different. Like game 4, Steve Kerr was sort of taking Draymond out, like substituting offense for defense, because Draymond wasn't even attempting to look at the basket, like for large portions of that game. Like something was in his head about how poorly he had started off the series.
He was Rajon Rondoing it, is what he was doing. Rondo right. at his worst. At the worst. There's some good Rajon Rondo, but like the worst part is what you definitely don't want. It almost seemed like going into game 5, Steve Kerr had gotten to Draymond Green and said, I can't play you if you're not even going to be a threat. Like if you're not going to like back somebody down every now and then, take a few of these shots. Like if you're just going to pass up the ball just seemingly every single time without a second thought toward the basket, I can't have you on the court on the offensive end. And that gives Boston a huge advantage. And Draymond Green came out, and credit to him, game 5. Game 5 was a much better overall game for him than what we've seen the last 2 games. And I think if you get that kind of Draymond in game 6 in Boston on Thursday night, or even back at Golden State in game 7, which would be, what would it be, Sunday or Monday? You're in great shape if you're Golden State. I wanted to ask you this. So I said that I thought Golden State would tie the series. I think you were on board with me with tying it 2-2. I thought Boston would get the win, sort of buck the numbers, but you were on board with Golden State coming back home and getting the win for game 5. Do you feel like this is anything but a home court back and forth right now? Like, are you still expecting sort of this to turn into a 7-gamer? Because we've talked about how Golden State sometimes toys with opponents and like they take games off, so on and so forth. I'm not so sure that I don't think Golden State puts everything into the bucket and tries to take Boston out in game 6 tomorrow night. What do you think? It's a lovely sentiment, but the Celtics are that good and going back home. And
off a loss, right?
And off a loss. You look at their performance in game 5, and Tatum, Brown, and Smart have all kind of settled into a similar lane like I talked about with the Warriors. You're getting about 20 points between Smart and Brown, or for each of those guys. Brown's got to do a little bit more offensively. Tatum's been above 25 points. But where is the other guy? Al Horford's been quiet for a couple of games now. The bench in game 5 was non-existent. Yeah. You had a couple of players, with 3 points, 3 of them, in fact, and that was it off the bench. They had 10 total points in the second unit. So it's not enough. And here again, for all that credit that we give Golden State offensively and to Steph, Golden State is a very good defensive team, and they have been for a couple of years now building into this. And they've done, again, maybe not a master class like Boston has on the defensive end, but they've been awfully close. And a lot of that credit goes to Draymond Green. But at the same time, to answer your question, coming back to game 6, Boston has shown this ability to very much dial in and take things one game at a time, and yet also to build off of losses and to continue finding a way to kick it up a notch in that intensity level, that energy level. And Boston as a home court, as a crowd, and as an organization, the players and so forth, they've been through this before. They've been in these big game situations before. They've been down before. I think it's just going to be an absolute deafening place. The Celtics fans are going to be just waiting to detonate, as soon as something big happens. And that does play a real part in playoff basketball. So I expect Boston to come out and to not only match the intensity that Draymond Green was able to bring and channel in a positive way last game, and that the Warriors were able to channel, but to be able to level that up. And oftentimes it takes a game and being able to watch film in the playoffs for the opponent to take a punch like that and then to be able to come back and counter punch. So I do think the Celtics win game 6. I do think it's a home court advantage affair now. I'm still picking the Warriors in 7. I had them in 6 up until Boston stole that first game in Golden State and was like, yep, all right, this is 7 games, but it's been Warriors throughout for me. I haven't seen anything yet that would lead me to believe otherwise, but Boston is so tenacious and has earned the right to be here and is a more than game opponent. You think of like the previous round, if it would have been Miami that had run out of that series and gotten here, I think we'd be done already. But Boston has been so much more diverse. They've got the defense, but they also have a superstar and a star capable of giving them a lot of points and a very balanced approach. It's going to be a fun game. Golden State, I think, can take shots. They can really try to land some punches, but Boston takes punches, and Boston continues to climb back into these games even when they get down and to make runs. So barring some type of convergence of the stars, literally, where Steph has a huge game, but you also get big games out of Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins, and those are the type of games where you go, yeah, nobody's beating the Warriors if that happens. We have yet to see that actually happen, though, where everybody is on at the same time. That's a Warriors blowout.
Sure.
I don't think we've seen that.
No, I don't think we see a blowout either. You bring up a good point about how, Ime Udoka and this coaching staff have been able to get these players to literally go game by game, to not let the previous result sort of infiltrate their thinking and their preparation. Like if there was any time for that to happen, it would have been after Marcus Smart imploded, in the Milwaukee series, right? And then they go right back to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee had a chance to just shut that thing down. And that was 6. That could have been done in 6. And they didn't. Boston came back and won the final 2 games to win that. Like if there was any time to sort of have a team mentally just sort of break for this team so far this series or this postseason, it would have been that, and it didn't happen. And so I commend and loathe, as a hater, their toughness, their mental toughness, and their ability to sort of circle the wagons every single game as a brand new entity. The only thing is, we haven't seen Boston respond to back-to-back losses in the playoffs. And I would agree, sort of tend to lean with you that I wouldn't expect them to go back to back to back to end the series and to be done in 6. I just wonder. I wonder. I think this is a 7-game series. We both were right on board with that as soon as the series sort of was about to get started, and especially after Boston won game 1. Listen, I was the one that said Boston sneaks away and wins game 1. They're winning the series in 7. And they can still win this thing in 7. I only wonder a little bit about the fact that I feel like Boston needs, and I need to see, like, I need what Steph what Steph did. I need like Jayson Tatum to do that once, and I feel like if he's got to be the guy for one of these final 2 games. I mean, it might just have to be game 6 just to get the 2-7. But I feel like you need a huge productive point, I mean, in terms of points game for him. Not like a 21-9 type game where like he plays really well, but like a 37-6 type game or something where like the game is back onto his shoulders. He's the superstar of this team, and he's been fine this series. He just hasn't been the guy that's had to take over. And now when the rubber's meeting the road here, I'd be surprised if you didn't see Tatum try to go out there and sort of do early on what Steph Curry was able to do in game 4.
Yeah, that's a great point. Steph and Tatum are very parallel to each other, obviously, as kind of the lead dogs for their team. And I think at this point, Jaylen Brown and Klay Thompson are really analogous to one another. So if you're talking about Boston, you also need either Marcus Smart or Al Horford as the most likely suspects there to give you an Andrew Wiggins type game as well. Wiggins has been so aggressive offensively. He's held his own on the defensive end, but he's just stepped up into those moments. And not only the willingness to take the shots, which Marcus Smart has, but the ability to knock them down and to keep pace. It's not just been Steph who's hit big shots. Andrew Wiggins has had a very, very nice knack here over the last few games and really throughout the entire playoffs of being able to step up and give them a big dunk, give them a big offensive board, get out in transition and finish, or just hit some very Kobe-esque, Tracy McGrady-esque turnaround fadeaway jumpers off his shoulder that's really unguardable. And the only other player in the series who can hit a shot like that is Jayson Tatum. So yeah, Boston's going to need that type of additional production from guys who are already at about 20 points per game, but to be in that 25 to almost 30 range, and Wiggins has given them such a huge lift on the glass that I don't know, does old man Al Horford have one more of these in him, 2 more of these in him, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, but
Smart continues to be aggressive. I love him for it, but he's doing so much on the defensive end, and he's never really been that type of offensive player in the NBA. I know he was in college, but maybe he's got, a huge two-way game in him too.
Yeah, he's had those games this year, right? Like those two-way games. But usually if he goes a little on the offensive side, he suffers a little bit on defense. And I think if you're Boston, you would take the defense over the offense at this point anyway. So I think in that case, I think Boston needs Jayson Tatum to have a monster game. And I think Al Horford needs to show up in the box score. I don't think it can be one of those like, hey, he just does it, off the stat sheet. Like, I think you need him scoring buckets. And again, he's had a couple of those this postseason too. Right, like he's not incapable, even though he's 204 years old, right? Like he's completely capable of doing this, and I think if you get those 2 type of efforts, like a solid, doesn't have to be overwhelming, but a solid effort from Al Horford, and you get sort of a semi to monster game from Jayson Tatum, yeah, I think no matter what your third quarter, fourth quarter numbers are going to end up being. I think Boston has a great shot at winning game 6, protecting that home court for the final time this season, and then going into game 7 with the shot to bring home the title.
Episode 110, Arky, Shea, the JJ Redick episode. You can find it on YouTube if you want the video version. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, all that good stuff. You want the audio-only version at Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. That's where we be. And, by this time next week. So game 7, if we get that far, is on a Sunday. We will have crowned an NBA champion the next time we talk. And that means it'll be time to get to my favorite time of the year, talking free agency, NBA draft, all that good stuff. I lied. I don't really have a favorite time of the year because the NBA trade deadline is my other favorite time, and the NBA playoffs are my other favorite time. It's all good, and the league never sleeps.
We just know your not favorite time of the year is the NBA draft. that.
Yeah, I mean and that's just because there's only so much basketball I can watch. Like I cannot devote time to college basketball and learn all those players with the amount of time spent with NBA. I mean, I could, but I'd probably be divorced. And
are you watching? Are you watching the YouTube highlights of some of these, international players?
It's really just I keep track of kind of the scuttlebutt, the articles, the stuff that comes up in the feed. Begin to get a feel for them. I'll get a lot more of a feel on draft night. And then once the player has been drafted and is an actual NBA player, then I start to do my homework. So it is a type of approach that often takes me out of the mix of being able to do like the NBA draft preview shows. People are constantly calling me up. I'm like, I'm not your guy actually for that. I'll talk everything about that. You want to do a post NBA draft wrap up? I can do that. But there are other people who do that far better than me.
Can you break down for me the chances of Paolo Banchero dropping from number 1, 2, or 3 into like the top 6?
Right, or Chet Holmgren gaining 5 pounds. Those are the things I'm not.
I love that discussion every year about guys who are super tall and super skinny.
Mm-hmm.
He's just got to put on weight.
Don't worry, he will add 15 pounds of muscle during the offseason, just like every other NBA player in the history of the league.
People forget how tiny Giannis was when he got into the league. Giannis was a stick.
Right. And well, I'm just saying the tongue-in-cheek press release every single offseason, every player that's interviewed, every coach, every trainer, well, that guy put on 15 pounds of muscle. It's kind of like it's an unsaid joke, understood joke among the league.
It's lean muscle, okay? Got into the protein, a few carbohydrates, not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no trans fats, okay?
Best shape of my life, baby.
All right, brother. That's it. Hey, thanks for being aboard this show. We'll do next week when we crown a champion. No matter what the NBA says, we'll crown our own champion next week.